Have you ever had one of those days? Yeah, me too. I had just one of those days the other day. I had been late to a meeting that I actually didn't even know I was supposed to be at until I got a text which said, "Inquiring minds want to know if you're showing up for this morning's meeting." So I got there. And then I rushed to my next meeting, which I was now unprepared for, since I was preparing for it when I got the text for the first meeting. And I was behind on my to-do list, and then my phone rang. Well, I quickly learned that there was a problem at my house, and the problem was that I had no water. My water had been turned off because I forgot to pay my bill. Well, this has never, ever happened to me before. So I have to tell you that in that moment, I certainly wasn't lost in the wilderness like the Israelites, but I did feel quite abandoned and quite ungrounded, and everything in my mind was going wrong. So I called a friend and proceeded to whine all about how everything was going wrong. And believe me, it doesn't happen often, but when I get on a roll, I can really whine. And I just kept thinking, this is so perfect. No water. Of course there's no water. We're in the middle of a baptismal discussion at church, and I have no water. The irony of the whole situation could not have been lost on me. So where are the promises of baptism when there is seemingly no water? On that day, I would have challenged Moses to a foot race up Mount Sinai to get that bronze snake serpent magic wand thing. It could have fixed a lot in my mind. Well, if you have ever had one of those days, or weeks, or years, where you wonder where in the world God is, then you're in good company. The Israelites have had like 14,600 bad days. They've been trudging and dying and praying and hoping in the wilderness of life for a very, very long time. While it might sound a bit odd, I must admit that I hold on to a little bit of hope in the fact that the Israelites' journey with God has not been easy. If their journey was easy, then I'd wonder why our journeys aren't easy. So this morning, I'm going to need your help a little bit. I need you to open up your bulletin and find Numbers, which is the first lesson. And you're going to be looking for verse 5. And the part you're looking for, you can just keep it open to that and keep your finger close by. The part you're looking for, you've got a whole bulletin. I'm challenging us this morning. The part you're looking for is, "For there is no bread and no water, and we detest this miserable food." Okay? So if we could just read it loudly together. "For there is no bread and no water, and we detest this miserable food." Okay. All right, well, just keep it out, because I'm going to ask for your help every once in a while. So here's the thing. In chapter 21, we read these words. All right, with me? "For there is no bread and no water, and we detest these miserable food." But this is not the first time they've said this. To grasp the whole story of what's actually going on here with the bronze serpent snake thing, we need to move back to chapter 20 in Numbers, where the people are also crying the very same thing. "For there is no bread and no water, and we detest this miserable food." Poor Moses. I'm thinking he is probably as hungry and thirsty as the next guy. So in chapter 20, which we don't have in our bulletin, bulletin, but in chapter 20, Moses goes and chats with God about the plight, about the fact they have no food or water. And God basically says to Moses, well, this is something we can easily take care of. There's already water right here, right in your very midst. So Moses looks around, probably rolls his eyes a bit and thinks, okay, whatever you say, because he does not only not see any water, but God tells him to do something that is downright ridiculous. So God says to Moses, take that stick you've been carrying around and hit that rock 2 times. Then you'll have water. So Moses does that, and lo and behold, water. And the people drink, and the livestock drink. Now that stick is important. We're going to run into that stick in just a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, when you feel as if you don't have the necessities to make it through the day, it will not only do a number on your body, but on your heart and mind as well. I'm sure that the water tasted good that day, but I think that what was refreshed was their souls. Hope out of a rock. Who would have thought? In that moment, the water said to them, God does care, and God will provide. And sometimes all we need is a taste of that, not a whole river. So then, as we approach the story that we have today, it's not all fun and games. The Israelites are attacked. There's arguments within the community. Aaron, who is Moses' beloved sidekick, dies. So by the time we get to chapter 21, it makes perfect sense to me that the people are again saying, for there is no bread and no water, and we detest this miserable food. This is what I would be saying also. Essentially, again, they're saying there is no hope. At this point, I've got to wonder if this didn't start to make God feel a little bit sad. Yeah, the food tastes terrible, as life sometimes does. But it usually just tastes bad because we've lost our appetites, not because the food isn't enough to sustain us. The burdens have crept back up on them, and they've probably started to wonder whether or not the water gushing out of the rock was just a mirage. The rocks are weighing them down, and they can't seem to crack them open all on their own. So again, where's that magic stick when you need it? And if things weren't bad enough already, here come the snakes. The people beg Moses for help, and he does. But the cure for the snake bite makes little sense. First, there's a rock that gushes water, and now we have a snake on a stick. Who would have thought? If I were there, in the midst of these snakes, I would have preferred God to get rid of the snakes, rather than just heal me from the snake bites. I would have preferred a lake of water, rather than having to look in unexpected places for the water. We would all be crying with them. For there is no bread and no water, and we detest this miserable food. Well, the good news is snakes and rocks are God's specialties. I'd rather not deal with the pain and thirst of life, but God would rather deal with them. And frankly, God would rather that we deal with them also. We don't get to run away from them. Which leads me to the rather unsettling genie God aspect of both of these stories. Both chapters in this story seem to give this idea that God has magic tricks up his sleeve. That somehow looking at a bronze magic wand or reciting the right incantation will make things all better. Right? Well, that's not been my experience with God. I actually don't think that's most people's experience with God. I actually don't think that's what the Israelites' experience with God was, even in the midst of the bronze serpent wand and the rock. Their parched lips and grumbling stomachs say more about the state of their hearts than the status of their physical bodies. It's times like that where I could go for a magic trick. And the truth of the matter is, I'm not above begging for a magic trick every once in a while. But once we start to think that that's the way in which God works, then we miss the true miracle of this story, of our story. God does miracles, not magic. So let's talk about the ways in which God actually works, and not the ways in which we would like God to work. So the snakes, they're killing the Israelites. And God says to them, I'm going to need you to look at this snake. You don't get to avoid it. Take a good, hard look at the very thing you hate. The thing which is causing you pain. Because then, and only then, when you're willing to turn and actually look upon it, can you know healing. So the question is, what's your snake? What's the thing in your life that you would most like to not look at? Look at that, and you'll not only find life, but you'll see God. The miracle is that God springs forth life from the most unlikely of places, rocks. The miracle is that our snakes can be our sources of healings. And I'll take that over magic any day. But we do have to take a good hard look at our snakes and our rocks. And once we start to do that, we will no longer cry. For there is no bread and no water, and we detest this miserable food. Now hopefully, many of you are still holding on to those rocks that you received at the beginning of the service. By now you may be getting a bit annoyed holding on to it, and you've probably gotten to know that rock pretty well. You don't get to put it down yet. You still have to hold on to it. You're going to circumvent the whole process. So you're probably getting to know it pretty well. You know its crevices and its smooth places and hard, it's hard. But you know it pretty well. You know the shape and the weight. Now I don't know what your snake is, or where your unexpected hope in your life will come from. But I do know that by not running away from the hard things, by looking at them, by getting to know them, that God will strike them down and spring forth new life. So here's the deal with your rock. When you leave here today, I will be taking water from the baptismal font to put it in the bowl in front of the baptismal font. So the glass bowl will be filled with baptismal waters, the promise that God will always be with us, no matter what, and can transform anything into new life. So you will be invited to put your rock, your snake, whatever your thing is, into the baptismal font, inviting God to take that and spring forth new life from it. But you got to hold on to it for a while. You got to get to know it. It's got to annoy you a little bit. It's got to sit in your soul so you know what you're putting and asking God to do. The promises God makes to us in the waters of baptism hold true, even when we don't know where the water is. See, God not only nails the snakes to a pole, but also himself, and raises them up with himself on a high hill in some God-forsaken place, so that once and for all of us who are dying in the wilderness may know that in the wilderness of life there is water and there is